This is the first of two videos on how to integrate AuthPoint with Radius. In this video, we'll cover what the Radius protocol is and show how AuthPoint can protect VPNs with MFA using Radius. In the next video, we'll talk about some additional integrations and how to troubleshoot Radius when problems occur. Now let's get started. Radius is a simple protocol that allows for authentication to happen inside of a local network. It is designed to be lightweight and easy to use, so it can integrate almost anywhere, and it allows authentication against a central server that's usually tied into LDAP or another user database like Active Directory. Radius is primarily used for authenticating VPN and Wi-Fi clients, and when using Radius with AuthPoint, we'll be focusing on the VPNs. Radius uses UDP to send data over the network and will typically use ports 1812 or 1645 by default. Many Radius servers also support the Radius accounting protocol, which will bind to an additional port, which is usually 1813 or 1646. Radius contains a lot of plain text information, which means we only want to send it inside of our network, and passwords inside of Radius are protected to varying degrees. When using PAP, passwords are only combined with the shared secret, but not actually encrypted. While when using CHAP or MS-CHAP v2, the passwords will be encrypted, so they are more secure, but it does make the integration with AuthPoint more complicated. EAP is another protocol you'll see used for Wi-Fi authentication, but won't be used in this video. Since Radius is an open source protocol, there are many different servers and clients out there. One of the most popular Radius servers is the Network Policy Server, or NPS, which is a Windows server role. And when integrating with AuthPoint, the AuthPoint gateway also contains a Radius server. So once AuthPoint is in place, we will be able to send all Radius traffic to our AuthPoint gateway to be processed. The last thing we need to know about Radius is that Radius servers will deny all Radius traffic by default. So that means we need to configure Radius clients so that we can tell our server who is authorized to send it traffic. We'll explore how to configure Radius clients in AuthPoint later in this video. Here we can see how the Radius integration with AuthPoint changes depending on which VPN type you are using. Note that this information is based on the mobile VPNs available in a WatchGuard Firebox and may not apply to VPNs available in other devices. The SSL and IPsec VPNs use PAP, so we will simply need to deploy the AuthPoint gateway and configure the Firebox to use that gateway to protect the VPN with MFA. When using the IKE v2 or L2TP VPNs, it depends on if the users that are connecting are coming from an LDAP environment like Active Directory. If you are only using users that have been created locally inside of AuthPoint, then you can simply use the AuthPoint gateway like before. However, if LDAP users are connecting to these VPNs, you will need to deploy a Windows Network Policy Server alongside the gateway to properly protect the VPN with MFA. In this video, we will just show Radius using PAP. Now let us look at a diagram showing the authentication flow using Radius. First, the VPN client will reach out to the Firebox in step 1. Then in step 2, the Firebox as our Radius client will send a Radius packet to the AuthPoint gateway. Finally, in step 3, the gateway will send the information to AuthPoint to validate everything. This diagram also shows the 3 areas that we will need to configure in order to complete the integration: the Firebox, the gateway computer, and the AuthPoint settings in WatchGuard Cloud. So let's get started by configuring AuthPoint. Here we are in WatchGuard Cloud. I'll start by going to Configure at the top, then AuthPoint, then I'll go to my resources on the left. I'll select the Radius client resource and add a new one. You might remember that Radius servers need to know who the valid clients are to accept packets from them. Well, here in the Radius client resource, we can configure the Radius clients for the AuthPoint gateway. What we configure here tells the AuthPoint gateway which IP addresses to accept Radius packets from. You'll need to enter the source IP address of the Radius traffic that the gateway will receive. So this will usually be something like a firewall or router's IP address. In this example, I'll add the trusted IP address of my firebox. You can only add a single host IP address per Radius client, but you can add as many Radius clients as you need to your gateway. So, if your device has multiple network interfaces, you may need to configure multiple Radius clients for that device. I'll also create a new shared secret to use, which I'll need to configure on the firebox later. We recommend creating a unique, long, and complex passphrase for your Radius shared secret to protect the user credentials. This option, the value sent for the Radius filter ID attribute, controls what group name AuthPoint will report back to the firebox or other Radius client. This group name will usually be used to authorize the user to use a VPN. By default, AuthPoint will report the user's AuthPoint group name, but we can have AuthPoint send over a user's Active Directory groups instead. We will talk more about MS-CHAP v2 in our second Radius video, so I'll save my resource to continue. When we create resources, we also need to define how users will authenticate to those resources based on their groups. I have clicked Authentication Policies on the left, which is where we configure these settings. In this account, I only have a single group for my users, and I already have a policy in place that enforces multi-factor authentication for the group. This policy is applied to all resources on the account, so my new resource is already included, and my users are authorized to use it. Radius Authentication only supports using the push or OTP options for MFA. When adding Radius resources to Authentication Policies, at least one of these options must be enabled. When push is enabled, it takes priority, and users will be sent push requests. Even if OTP is checked, one-time passwords can only be used if push is disabled in the policy. You can use Authentication Policies and policy objects to configure the level of access that you need for all of the different users in your environment. For more information about Authentication Policies and how to configure them, refer to the Using AuthPoint Authentication Policies video. Now that we have our resource and access policies set up, we need to configure our gateway. We navigated to the Gateways page on the left, and we can see our existing gateway here. Refer to our Using the AuthPoint Gateway video for more information on creating or installing the gateway. I'll edit my gateway, and under the Radius section, I'll add my Radius resource. We also need to configure the port that the gateway will use to listen for Radius traffic. I'll use the default port of 1812, but be careful using this port if there is already a Radius server like NPS installed on the gateway computer. In that case, you may need to choose a non-standard port here. I'll save my gateway to complete the AuthPoint configuration. Now we're on the gateway computer. The gateway has already detected the new settings I've configured and is ready to receive Radius packets. However, the computer's Windows Firewall is enabled and must be accounted for, or it will block all incoming Radius connections. Best practice is to add a rule, so I've created a new inbound rule here in the Windows Firewall for the UDP Radius port that I configured my gateway to use. You can also disable the Windows Firewall if you prefer. Now we just need to set up our firebox to use the gateway for authentication. Here I've added my AuthPoint gateway as a new Radius server on my firebox. I used the same port and shared secret that I configured in AuthPoint. Here in the SSL VPN settings, I've configured my AuthPoint Radius server as the default server for authentication. I've also added my AuthPoint group name to authorize my AuthPoint users to access this VPN. When enabling Auto Reconnect, we also recommend requiring users to authenticate again for a better experience with MFA. For more information on configuring the SSL VPN, refer to our documentation and video tutorials. Now let's connect to the VPN. I've already installed the WatchGuard SSL VPN client. You can download the client from the WatchGuard software downloads page or from your Firebox. I'll enter my credentials in the VPN client, and since I selected one-time password in the AuthPoint access policy, I'll need to enter the one-time password from the mobile app right after my password here in the VPN client. After supplying both factors of authentication, the VPN successfully connects. That will do it for integrating AuthPoint with Radius Part 1. In this video we discussed how Radius works and the differences between PAP and MS-CHAP v2. We covered how to set up AuthPoint, the gateway, and a firebox to protect the SSL and IPsec mobile VPNs with MFA. Join us in Part 2 to learn more about using Radius with MS-CHAP v2 and how to troubleshoot Radius when it isn't working.